Tonight we are joined by two former guests to discuss George Lazenby in on Her Majesty's Secret Service.
This never happened to the other fellow.
Yeah, I know, George. This is as bow ties is sometimes called first. Enjoy. Welcome to Bow Ties Sometimes Cool. Myself, Ashley, and Ed. Hello, Ed.
Good evening, Ash. How's things?
Very good, thank you. And tonight we are joined by two former guests, Mr. Rob Valentine. Good evening, Rob.
Good evening.
And Mr. James Sylvester. Good evening, James.
Hello there.
Tonight we're going to be talking about On Her Majesty's Secret Service. So, gents, Ed's got a theory.
Well, I was quite young when I saw it first. I must have been, I don't know, 6 or 7. And to be honest with you, couldn't tell the difference between Sean Connery and Roger Moore. I don't know. It was just James Bond. And then this fella who looked different to the others, the pre-credits, he looked at the camera and said, "This never happened to the other fella." And ever since then, I thought, oh, James Bond must be like Doctor Who. It's just a name passed on from agent to agent. So like James Bond 007 is code name for their top agent. And that's always been in my head. And I know there's contradictions with the whole thing of Tracy and Moore's Bond going to visit the grave and things, but that's how I think it works. I think the Bond of the books and the Bond of the film are two completely different creatures. And film Bond is meant to be different people, but I could be completely wrong.
I think you probably are, yeah. Mainly because I get what you were saying. I don't think Peter Hunt, who directed the film, really helped things there. He was just trying to break the ice, I think, but he has created a bit of an issue in James Bond fandom.
We didn't know how to introduce this guy. We took elaborate means of opening a sequence with introducing him and all that sort of thing. So in the end, we said, what's the point? Just let's get on with it.
My name's Bond. James Bond.
And I remember most about that scene was Peter Hunt saying, "Say that line that you've been saying most of the movie."
This never happened to the other fella.
That was perfect. As always, you sometimes worry so much about things that you just throw away.
It was a way of breaking the ice.
I'm not sure he had any other choice, though, looking back at the time, because it was such an innovative thing to do. And by then, on television, we'd seen, the Doctor Who comparison, we'd seen William Hartnell become Pat Troughton, but for a major international movie franchise to change its leading actor was a hell of a revolutionary thing, particularly because of the cult that had grown up around Sean Connery. I'm not sure, and again, I might be wrong, it's all opinion and subjective, but I think if he'd tried to ignore it completely, I'm not sure that would have worked. I think there had to be a bit of a wink to the audience on that occasion. And yeah, we've changed the guy, but hey, we're all in it. We're all still going to have a laugh. So, I don't know. And it's an interesting point, the codename theory, yeah. It's a controversial subject, isn't it?
However, the only thing I would say, Ed, though, even within the film itself, then within about, 20 minutes, they kind of try and dispel that again, though, because when Bond goes back to his office, which is you only ever see Bond's office twice, once in Die Another Day and this one, he sort of starts emptying his desk, doesn't he? And he's got the knife there from when he met Honey Rider.
You say that, he could be emptying the other fella's desk.
Well, yeah, Rob, maybe voice a reason here.
Well, the truth of it is, the film is all over the shop in terms of continuity, because on one level, it is a pure adaptation of the novel, the same way that From Russia with Love is. And in the novel and in the film, he meets Ernst Stavro Bielefeld for the first time in this film. He's also met him in the film series for the first time in the previous film, Fiore's Only. But they also do, they do the two camera gag about the other fella who it could be a Prince Charming reference rather than a Sean Connery reference. That's a bit up in the air. It's a Sean Connery reference, really. But then they hammer home the continuity. And but how did he get? He didn't keep Red Grunt's wire wristwatch. He didn't keep Honey Rider's swimming dagger. He's got no reason to have the things he's got in his desk. They're rando props that have been brought out of the props cupboard. So in terms of continuity, it's a shit show basically.
It is. I mean, actually, when you think of it like that, yeah. I mean, they obviously do it as a little nod to the previous films, but how random would it be? Yes, what do I keep on my desk? Files? Anything like? No, no. I've got a dagger from someone I met a good few years ago.
Yeah, I mean, I think I know I completely take that point, Ed. I'm a big fan of the books. And I said this thing when I was on the show before. The literary Bond is completely different beast. It's not. I don't think it's even meant to be the cinematic Bond. Certainly, by the time of Goldfinger, it was its own animal by then. But this film, I think, goes to great pains to try and hammer home the point that this is the same guy. You've got it in the opening sequence, and that beautiful montage. I mean, it's one of the best opening sequences, and it's wordless, and I love it. Love the Union Jack cocktail glass. Everything about that sequence is to die for. But you've got the overplays of the previous movies. You've got the score of previous tracks when he's doing that desk scene, and you've got different themes playing. And throughout the whole series, I think up until Die Another Day, when the reboot with Casino Royale, it's intended to be the same character. Whether each Bond is a soft reboot is debatable, but the whole Tracy connection, and it's an orphan whose parents got killed in a climbing accident. I think there is too much similarity, even though they're wildly different interpretations. There's too much similarity running through those different characters to say, yeah, these are different people who just happen to be assigned the name James Bond. But hey, I ain't dying on any hills here with that. That's just how you read it and how you watch it.
I think the thing is they're taking the film franchise all over the place now, really, with sort of Daniel Craig having his own standalone arc, really, from being pre-agent, pre-00 until his death, and I always say to Ed that those are just sort of like a standalone set of films by themselves, that almost don't have any.
It's a bubble universe of Daniel Craig's all on its own. But I have a hard time buying the idea, though, that up until then it's all one continuity. It's several. I think the first 5 work in that regard. OHMSS is the first torpedo in the hull on that on the series continuity, and then Diamonds Are Forever. It's kind of that doesn't again. Suddenly we're into it's another sub parallel universe for Sean Connery. Then Roger Moore turns up, and it is meant to be the same universe, but it doesn't quite add up, and they're still trying to ignore OHMSS until Spy Who Loved Me. And I have a really hard time imagining that Pierce Brosnan is the same Bond in the same universe who Timothy Dalton played, because Timothy Dalton's films absolutely depend on James Bond being a seething rage ball, and I just can't see Pierce Brosnan in License to Kill. He's too laid back for that.
You were supposed to be in Istanbul last night. I'm afraid this unfortunate lighter business has clouded your judgment. You have a job to do. I expect you on a plane this afternoon.
I haven't finished here, sir.
Leave it to the Americans. It's their mess. Let them clear it up.
Sir, they're not going to do anything. I owe it to Leiter. He's put his life on the line for me many times.
Oh, spare me this sentimental rubbish. He knew the risks.
And his wife?
This private vendetta of yours could easily compromise Her Majesty's government. You have an assignment, and I expect you to carry it out objectively and professionally.
Then you have my resignation, sir.
We're not a country club, 007.
Well, it just wouldn't have been written that way, would it? I mean, it's amazing.
No.
But it's amazing to think from John Glenn and Cubby Brock, or not Cubby perhaps, but John Glenn wanted Roger to be Bond then in 1989. He thought, Roger, he shouldn't have retired and he should have stayed on being Bond. And you think, Christ, really? I love Roger. But can you imagine 60-year-old Roger hanging off a tanker truck? I don't know.
Well, the thing is, he wouldn't have had to have all those gadgets and cars, because he could just keep on showing his best pass and he would be able to go out on it.
Well, I kind of think On Her Majesty's Secret Service is at its best when it's just trying to be an adaptation of the book.
Yeah, very much agreed. very much.
It's just very worried about the fact it's changed its lead from, at the time, the biggest film star in the world, who's up there with the Beatles in terms of international popularity, and they're terrified. And I think that's the truth of it.
It is, and I think it's that fear that drives the continuity. And you're quite right, Rob. I think if they just made the film, say, yeah, this is a guy, he's called James Bond, and this is his latest thing, and forget what you've seen before, enjoy this, it would have been arguably more successful than it was. I mean, it's still a successful movie. It's a profitable movie, but obviously the takings were massively different from what went before. I don't know what the inflation adjustment is like, but it went from something like $130 million to $60 million or something like that at the time, which was, oh Christ, what have we done wrong here? And you made the point before about Diamonds Are Forever. It's a real frustration for me. Every time, I love Diamonds Are Forever as a movie, but you put it on, where the hell is the revenge? Where if this guy's murdered his wife? I'm not just going after some camp guy in drag and squirting water pistols at him. I want to get the guy who's murdered my wife, and there's absolutely none of it.
Welcome to hell, Blofeld.
Yeah, and Moneypenny saying, "Hey, when you come back, bring me a ring." Yeah.
What can I bring you back from Holland?
A diamond in a ring.
Would you settle for a tulip?
Yes.
Yeah. How sensitive
you
of you, Moneypenny.
Cold-hearted bitch.
I mean, Jesus Christ! And that's what they did. They were never quite sure in the whole series how to take it, like you say, until Spy Who Loved Me. They never mentioned it again.
It's interesting because there are two phases with the books. There's the kind of the early phase where Bond's a little bit more, he's younger and a bit more Bulldog Drummond. And then the kind of the Raymond Chandler world-weary melancholy starts to come in more. I can't remember where exactly. But at some point after Diamonds in the film series, I think they start to realize the strength of the character, the extra character development of just Bond's a widower and he doesn't talk about it. And that's just, that becomes this really great little added thing, which kind of mirrors the very, very slight change in the character that Fleming introduced. It's just a bit more melancholy than it begins with.
It was that the whole thing where Roger Moore though visits the grave, Tracy's grave. That was actually a continuity thing, because when that scene was written, it wasn't going to be Roger that was going to be Bond. They were going to recast him. So again, it was just a case of trying to bring back the continuity. But yeah, there's not many references. There's that one, and then obviously Tracy gets mentioned again in License to Kill. Like you say, when it's like we don't talk about it.
Oh, James, I wanted you to have something. You know the tradition? The next one who catches this is the next one who...
No. Thanks, Stella. It's time I left.
Oh, James. Did I say something wrong?
He was married once, but it was a long time ago.
But it is strange when especially when you think about On Her Majesty's Secret Service. Yeah, lost his wife, and then it's almost forgotten about.
It's a film that Eon Productions are embarrassed about for about 3 decades, and now it's become like it's the most legendary Bond film in some ways. And No Time to Die is just slathered in callbacks to it. To its detriment, but anyway, that's another conversation. But now, in recent years, OHMSS has been hugely elevated. It's no longer the black sheep.
No, and I'm probably calling out how enlightened our generation was. I think we're all roughly of the same age, gents. But I certainly remember being at college, and it's starting to become the narrative then that when I was growing up, it was, so my dad was one, well, we don't watch that one, it's George's rubbish, he got fired after one movie. I'm not so sure it happened quite like that. I think they probably wanted to keep him, Dad. But it was derided. It was the one on at Christmas that nobody watched because it was shit. And then when I was at college age, it was actually, it's a pretty good film. And when you watch it, probably one of the best stories, one of the most well constructed, methodical stories. I know they took some exceptions with things, but that's a Bond film. That's what it does. And then when I read the books, it was, this is a hell of a story, and it's almost perfectly put up there on screen. And now it's almost a cliche to say, well, actually, it's one of my favorites. So it's just a callback to how great our generation is, chaps. Really, we were the first ones to spot it.
I think it's always been a victim of our old friend received fan opinion. Sort of, there's this group think of what's good and what's bad in Doctor Who. You cannot criticize the Hinchcliffe era. No, you can't do that.
Exactly.
And
yes. Yeah.
It was on Her Majesty's was, well, it's not Connery, so it can't be good. And then you actually watch it, detach yourself get yourself a little bit of distance, detach yourself, and watch it as a film rather than part of a franchise. And as a film in its own right, if this had been the only Bond film ever made, it's a really well-made film in its own right, without any of the baggage. Just strip it away from any of the baggage. It's a stripped-down love story that goes horrifically wrong. It's an absolute masterpiece of a film,
and it's the most beautiful up to that point. It's the best-looking Bond film.
It's got everything about it, and I think that's a great point, Ed. If you eradicate the Bond franchise and you have OHMSS, it'd be up there with The Spy Who Came In From the Cold. It would be lauded, and it probably would have been at the time. It would be, my God, this is fantastic. But as you say, it suffers by comparison. It's not Connery. It's not Moore. It's got to be shit. He only did one. He must be rubbish. Which I suppose brings us on to George. Sorry, I'm hijacking.
Well, yeah. What do you think of George, guys?
This isn't an original opinion, but I agree with, I think it was Steven Soderbergh, who pointed out that there are certain there's one or two bad lines and a few little bits that aren't kind to his performance, but if you cut them, what's left is great. George Lazenby was a royal pain in the arse, by all accounts, and I think Peter Hunt, was sick of him. But in terms of getting a performance out of him, he delivers some. There are some parts of his performance which are great. There are some parts that aren't, but they should have just been cut. There are a few ADR quips he's given, which if would be just the scenes and his performance would be better by omission. So I actually think he delivers everything that's required for a great performance. And if a few weaker moments had just been left on the cutting room floor, that's how you build a performance in cinema. So I kind of, I think he's great. And there is an argument that, imagine if Sean Connery had been in this film. I don't think Sean Connery as an actor has the vulnerability that George Lazenby has. And I can't imagine the stuffing being knocked out of Sean Connery the way the stuffing is knocked out of Lazenby by the end of the film. He's utterly destroyed in that final scene. I can't imagine Connery doing that.
No, he is.
Connery? Yes, Connery. Yeah.
It wouldn't be believable, and it's absolutely no disrespect to Connery at all. The guy was tremendous, but as a love story, as I'm gonna, the infamous womanizer falling in love, it just would not be believable. And as you say, having him kicked around, having him break down in that final scene, I don't know. The flip argument is Tim Dalton was offered it in '69 by all accounts, anecdotally, and he turned it down. I think that was probably a wise choice at the time to turn it down. He would have been far too young.
He was 24 and thought he was too young for it. Dalton could have done it. Absolutely. Yeah.
He would have pulled it. If he was Dalton in The Living Daylights, he'd have walked that home. He would have been brilliant with it. But I think it was a wise choice. He was just doing like The Line in Winter and stuff like that at the time. Would he have been believable as a seasoned spy? Who knows? But I think it was the right choice.
Cubby did want him very much. He thought he would be a splendid Bond.
I was about 24, 25 then. Had a good career as a young man in films, having done The Line in Winter, Cromwell, Mary Queen of Scots, Wuthering Heights. And Mr. Broccoli very kindly asked me if I'd be interested.
But when he came in for the interview, Timothy himself said, I just think I'm too young for this role.
I think Bond should be between about 35 and 40. And as a 25, 26-year-old, it would not have been right.
George, I've got a lot of time for him. Again, growing up, I was horribly influenced by my parents' watching taste, and they had no time for George Lazenby at all. So he was a big head. It was rubbish. But he's not. He's great. He's really sympathetic. It could have been helped more with the with the cutting, as you say, Rob, with the cutting of certain scenes or certain quips that aren't quite there. And I think it was really hampered by the decision to dub him for a huge chunk of that movie.
Oh, yeah.
Really winds me up. And I know it wound him up from interviews. He'd had no idea they were doing it. He goes to watch the premiere and it's Inspector Wexler's voice. What? Why are you doing this to me? But
it could have been worse. He could have been overdubbed by Nicky van der Zyl. You know?
Indeed, yeah.
Which happened to a lot of people in the Bond film.
Indeed. But I think he carries it well, and I think it's testament of how good a movie it is that you've got a director, a leading lady, and a leading man who, by all accounts, really couldn't get on, and it turns out as well as it did. It's a beautifully made picture.
It is one of those really good arguments, though, for a film where, I mean, he is the weak link in the casting, but you can construct a near perfect film around an imperfect lead, because everyone else around him is just at their best. Lois Maxwell has never been better as Moneypenny she's never been better written as Moneypenny than in that film, but her performance is incredible. And Diana Rigg and Telly Savalas is happens to be my favorite Blofeld. I think he's the only Blofeld who I believe, and he's the closest to the Blofeld in the books. It's funny though, with all the Bond films, I find that you get little moments where you kind of catch a whiff of Fleming. You never really get the books ever in Bond. You get approximations, but occasionally in every Bond film you get just a little kind of sense of the books, and you get lots of moments in OHMSS especially where it's like, oh yeah, that's the feel of the book. But but it's interesting that with Lazenby, he's a Connery replacement. He's not. They haven't gone right. Okay, how do we cast another actor to play this character? It's like, how do we replace Connery? And that's another weakness.
It is, isn't it? Because I've not thought of that before. With Moore, they've quite clearly gone for a light-hearted, popular actor in a different tone in the movies. Dalton only took the role on the condition he could change the direction of the character, and Pierce, I think, probably similar. I mean, I think by that point, Pierce would have taken the job, whatever the conditions were. Never was a man so desperate to play Bond. but yeah, he clearly had his own idea of how it should be, the nod to the audience and all the rest of it. And Craig the same. But you're quite right. Let George, poor guy, the old story. He was cast wearing Connery's suit that he'd picked up from Savile Row that Connery had never collected. He was cast to be Sean Connery, not to be James Bond or to put his spin on James Bond.
I tested and interviewed I don't know how many 100. And we went through a whole range of discussions saying, what would the new Bond look like? Should we make him a modern Bond? And it was agreed by practically everybody in the end that no, what we wanted was another Sean Connery.
I got a phone call in Paris from Maggie saying, you got to come over to London. I think that you're ideal for this role that they can't fill. And I said, what's the role? And she said, I think you'd be right for James Bond. And I said, why's that? She said, just your arrogance.
Lazenby contacts Anthony Sinclair, who had tailored Connery's suits for previous 007 films.
And I said, I want a suit like Sean Connery. And they said, well, it'll take about 6 weeks. So I got one here that they didn't pick up, they don't want. If you like that, I'll sell it to you. And I got longer arms by about this much than him, because all they did was put the sleeves down. Bob's your uncle, I got his suit. And then I went to his barber, Kurt the barber, at the Dorchester Hotel. And I said, give me a haircut like Sean Connery. And meanwhile, Cubby Broccoli's in the chair right behind me, because they all used that barber. Someone said later that Cubby said this guy'd make a good James Bond, but he looks like a successful businessman. And that was how the story started, that Cubby discovered me in a barber shop.
Yeah, he was not a strong actor at that time. Probably never developed his potential, but he wasn't poor, he wasn't bad. It's a great film, and he made Bond almost romantic, which is weird.
And that's something that Connery never did. Connery was a killer who had sex with women and enjoyed what he did. And there's very little in the way of interiority with him. To be honest, he's one of the greatest screen actors ever, and that's not a criticism. It's just a description of his way of playing the part, and it's why he's so damn good in it. But I just don't think OHMSS as is is something he would have. And also, to be honest, by 69, he was stopping looking like someone you want to look like. Even though he's still like Sean Connery, I'd even contend, even by Thunderball, he's looking like he's kind of, getting a little bit worse for wear. But
yeah, I mean, people comment on Roger aging noticeably between Octopussy and View to a Kill. I mean, Christ, that was 2 years. It looked like he'd aged a decade between those films. But yeah, Sean Goldfinger, obviously, it was his peak in all sorts of ways, but certainly the way that he looked in the character, it was immaculate. Thunderball, he was losing interest. Yeah, You Only Live Twice, which I'm just not in any way a fan of. I
think it's dreadful. It's a really boring episode of Thunderbirds. But
it is, and again, the cliche. Oh, there's never been a bad Bond film. You know what? If that was on, I'd turn it off. I just don't enjoy it. I like everybody who's in it. I like portions of it. To sit and watch You Only Live Twice. No.
Yeah, I do have another. I know there's an OHMSS podcast, but I've never been that impressed with the volcano there, and this is the first time I've ever shared that information with anyone.
You heard it here first.
However, I did see OHMSS on the big screen at Prince Charles Cinema before the pandemic. So 2019, 18, 19 must have been around then, and for the first time, those helicopter shots over not Piz Gloria, but on the way up to Piz Gloria, over like the public skiing areas as the helicopters taking Bond to Piz Gloria. In the cinema, for the first time ever, I started to get a bit giddy. I thought, oh bloody hell, this is high, and that was something I never got on TV, but on the big screen, those alpine scenes, you suddenly realise just how vast these vistas are. So that was just a bit of big screen vertigo was quite the revelation.
I think I said right in our very, very first podcast we talked about Connery, and I think I made the point. I thought that Goldfinger sort of set the template for how Bond films were made. It was the sort of de facto go-to. Let's have a Bond film where you've got the villain with the sidekick, you've got this Bond girl with a silly name, you've got the countdown. And whereas on a Majesty's, then it doesn't set the template, but it definitely bottles the ink on later Bond films. So you've got like you said there, Rob, the big vistas, the snowy bits, you've got the car chases, which again, it was another building block in really what was to come in the future. And again, we've said it before, chaps, but it was to the film's detriment. For years, it was, oh no, it's the rubbish one that you don't bother with, and it's always been overlooked. And I'm really, really glad it's getting the sort of in Welsh applaud my on here. I can't remember the English for it. The adulation it deserves. There we go. Oh yeah, it
is. And that point, the ski slopes, the snowy mountain peaks. That is, even in its derided period, that was a trope that was often returned to. How many times you see Bond on the ski slopes? It became a staple, and the imagery of OHMSS was really important in that. You're quite right, and I think it's suffered obviously from the enormous hype, the Bond mania of the '60s, culminating. Even You Only Live Twice again. Sorry, going back to the wrong film, but even the movie posters, the marketing around it, I hate it. You've got Bond, walking up the volcano there on his tiptoes, carrying a gun nonchalantly like that. What the hell? What the hell is this about? It's supposed to be a spy. He's a man. He's not a superhero. He's a guy. And then to bring it crashing down to earth so much with Majesties. I can understand why casual audiences would say, "What the hell is this? Where is the exploding volcano? Where's the larger than life villain? Where's the guy with a scar down his face?" I can understand why it might have been a disappointment. I think they were wrong to think that, but it was such a change in tone with the lead character change as well. It suffered from that unfairly, I think.
I can understand though, because I think Lazenby did have he did, he said, it was Connery's gig, and I can understand his belief that it's the 70s now, it's Bond's old hat, it's a 60s thing, yeah, I can understand where that kind of that doubt and fear and that sense came from, because it's going from kind of overblown pop art to kind of pared down spy drama with a lesser actor in a lead role. That's a lot to worry about, and for a general audience, it's like a disciplined phase immediately following like a decadent one, and that's not usually the way it goes. So there's huge
Absolutely.
tonal whiplash, but it's tonal whiplash combined with a lead that even the filmmakers don't really trust to be their lead. And I think the audiences can sense that, or could at the time. Now we're completely divorced from the period, so it's kind of we don't watch Bond films in order, not that way anymore. But if you're going through it if you're living through it chronologically, yeah, that doubt makes sense to me.
Okay, so what we're going to do now, guys, we're going to have a bit of a chat. We've talked about George Lazenby. We're going to talk about the other actors who were in the film and a little bit about the plot of the movie.
So starting off with Diana Rigg then, which apparently they didn't get on. Apparently she had some garlic before the kissing scenes and things like that. But I don't feel you can necessarily tell that on the screen though. But going back to what we were discussing before, there was a lot of tension, I think, behind the scenes on the recording, on the filming of that film, and yet I don't feel it comes across necessarily. But maybe that's because I'm concentrating on other things like the fact it's not Sean Connery and other stuff.
It does, perhaps it does in a certain way, but I think that's possibly because of the character that Diana Rigg is playing. I mean, I would say that as a Bond fan, absolutely, she is the person. She is the woman he would fall for and marry. Her character is brilliant, but also at the same time, she's clearly playing a very damaged and difficult person. She's had this horrendous upbringing with this crime lord, who obviously loves her dearly, but she's been clearly affected by it. She has all sorts of attachment issues and risk issues. So I think perhaps some of the tension is disguised by that characterization, or is covered by it. I think she is absolutely perfect in a very difficult to play role. And as I said, if Bond was going to marry anyone, it's going to be her.
Yeah, I mean, Bond has a weakness for it's birds with a wing down, I think was Fleming's phrase, wasn't it? Yeah. So she's absolutely someone he'd become protective over. And because she's so brilliant and competent, and her father's a pirate, essentially. And again, Bond has a weakness for pirates. Yeah, she's the perfect woman for him. I kind of think that, I mean, there was friction between them, but not that much. But it equaled ink in the press. It was something for, journalists to write about. So I think the whole garlic thing was more something that was less based in any kind of reality and more in it was more something that was happened to be picked. Some comment about, oh, you've had garlic was then picked up and then run with to sell newspapers. But yeah, they did have a bit of a public spat and some letters published publicly, I think, between them. So that, yeah, but again, George Lazenby, massively inexperienced model, really, not an actor, a model turning actor, and Diana Rigg, a hugely experienced TV and theatre actor, who is a great tragedian, also being kind of left, feeling, probably not being paid that much. I mean, paid a lot more than she was in the Avengers, no doubt, but still kind of, I think being asked to, keep an eye on George, which I'm sure Telly Savalas wouldn't have been asked to do. She does a great job, and I think she is brilliant. I think she makes him better, but if there are weaknesses with him, I think it is shown up in their relationship, because he is comparatively a block of wood. I've said some nice things about his performance and his general persona, but he can't rise to her level. He just can't. But then you see Diana Rigg and Telly Savalas playing off each other, and bloody hell, if it isn't some of the best acting between characters in any of the films up to that point, and to be honest, in most of them since.
I know why I did it. I mean, I knew perfectly well why I'd got the job. George Lazenby was ill-equipped. Didn't know he was a model, male model. So I was there to sort of steer him through and give it some gravitas, which I did.
That's very interesting. So you thought that they had gone for a classical actress alongside a male model?
Yeah. Do you see what I mean?
Yeah.
Just to balance it up.
And it's entered history not entirely for the right reasons, that film, because it was regarded at the time by a lot of people as a disappointment or a disaster.
It's now one of the most successful, if not the most successful Bond movie. I don't say that with any great pride, but it is.
What was the feeling on set about George Lazenby?
He was really difficult. It's not for nothing that they didn't offer him any sequels. I mean, he was just difficult because I think he needed help. Not in the acting. He was really quite good, wasn't he? And attractive and sexy and all those things, but just difficult off stage. He kind of thought he was a film star immediately and started throwing his weight around. And then, of course, it was, accused me of eating garlic before love. It was just so petty and ridiculous. I didn't.
We might as well get that out of the way, but she wrote a newspaper at the time, but it's still printed as fact that you would chew garlic before the love scenes with him.
Garlic and, oh yes, rubbish.
Never did.
No, I mean, I think I had some chicken liver pate in the thing, which had garlic in it, which, silly me, I should have thought of, but I didn't. And I could have easily sprayed or whatever. No. Poor old George, I don't know what he's doing now, but he's definitely was the architect of his own demise as a film star.
Yeah, I mean, there's such a good supporting cast. They say Telly Savalas and Diana Rigg. It's more changed from it's changed from a sort of a plot-driven action drama to a character-driven drama, because the characters the characters are so much stronger. You said about James, you said before about sort of Tracy's background and upbringing. Diana Rigg plays that, and it shows through her performance. And so the depth of characterization is a lot better than it had been in anything previous. And again, it's almost like a template and a manual of how Bond films from that point onwards should be made.
Yeah, this was the first substantial, emotionally deep of any kind of depth character written for a woman. Says the Moneypenny was tremendously written for and acted in this movie. You have a mature, confident, capable, competent, and damaged woman, expertly played, and wasn't simply there to look good in a bikini. And Rob, you're quite right. In those scenes when George is with her, much as I like George, and I really do like George, the level of acting skill is really incomparable. Diana is carrying those scenes every time. And you're probably quite right as well. They wouldn't have asked Telly Savalas to look after George in that way. And I've heard that scene with Telly Savalas and Diana, where they're quoting poetry and looking out on the sunrise in His Glory. It's criticised as, oh, Telly Savalas is a thug. He shouldn't be playing this kind of role. He's not romantic or believable. I think he absolutely nails it. I mean, he's not just until then. He may be cast as a heavy, or as Kojak or whatever. But I think perversely, given that Blofeld is a baddie, it gives him license to want to really stretch his range, and it shows particularly in those scenes how good he really is.
There are some tiny things I love about his performance, and one of them is that it's queer coding, but the way he carries his cigarette vertically.
Yeah.
The vertical cigarette, but also in the novel Thunderball, Blofeld is described as having eyelashes like a doll.
Mm.
And in some of those close-ups where Blofeld is describing his plan to Bond, you can see he's got mascara. He's got his eyelashes are on point. He's got hugely full eyelashes like a doll.
Yeah, he was absolutely. Yeah, I agree with you. You said before he's your favorite Blofeld. Absolutely, 100% for me. He nails it. I'm mortified they didn't bring him back for Diamonds. I love Charles Gray. I'll watch him in anything. He's a tremendous guy. But Telly had so much presence. And I think he really got the part.
What he does, the thing he gives Blofeld, which it's not. Blofeld is a different character in the books.
Well, yeah,
and this is I don't want to go into it, but I think in Thunderball, I think really the big literary antecedent, because the literary character is mentioned in OHMSS, I think, is Nero Wolfe. I think that by Rex Stout. So Rex Stout's detective Nero Wolfe, I think, is the literary parent of Ernst Stavro Blofeld. I think that's where Blofeld comes from. Because it's mentioned in the books that M and Bond both read Rex Stout. So, and I think that's the clue. But what Savalas does with it, if you look at a guy who started out on the streets and has said, no, I'm going to become an urbane gentleman, and that's what he gives it. He gives it this kind of, kind of not unlike Lex Luthor, this kind of born in Suicide Row, but I'm going to make something of myself and become someone on the world stage, and that's what Savalas gives it. And he does it with he conveys all that with very, very little indeed, and it's possibly just by virtue of casting Telly Savalas in that role.
Absolutely, I agree 100%. And also, I think it's probably the deepest role for Blofeld. I mean, in most of the films he's in, he's generic bad guy. Generic head of mastermind, head of a criminal organization. He has a certain morality to him. It's a perverse one, but he has a certain morality to him in this picture. Essentially, he wants to be forgiven. He wants to be recognized as a descendant of the nobility, given his status and given a pardon for his crimes. And if you do that, I will leave the world alone and I will sit quite nicely in my retirement. Very perverse and a maniacal way of going about it, but essentially it's a cliche again. He's wanting to be understood and almost loved, and I don't see that any of the other actors. Again, it always sounds when you're criticizing them that you're having a go at them, and I'm not. I love them all. I think they're great, but I don't see that anybody else could pull that off in the way that Telly Savalas did.
Yeah, there's not a hint of, for want of a better word, camp to his performance.
No,
there's nothing of the cliche Dr. Evil Blofeld to him at all. He's a real character rather than, like you said, rather than your generic big bad guy head of a baddie organization. There's layers to him, and I think he wants to be accepted. He wants to be accepted.
Yeah.
And underneath everything else, he wants to be accepted. He wants to be part of the elite, part of the establishment, and that's his big master plan.
It is, and again, going back to the book of it, at that time, when the books were written, the establishment was this very colonialist, white middle class or upper middle class gentry, almost. Bond was supposed to be like a disenfranchised aristocrat, almost in a way. The way it's written, and Blofeld desires to be part of that society. That's certainly there in the book, and again, I think it's the only movie iteration of Blofeld where that really does come across. He wants to be part of the gang, he wants to be part of the club and accepted. And if you don't let me do it, I'll kill everybody. But
he's also, and this isn't in the book, but he's also resentful of the mafia. The Corsican mafia. The mafia don't let people like me in either. So he's kind of he's affronted on multiple fronts of the aristocracy don't accept me. The mafia don't accept me. The governments of the world don't accept me. He's got this wonderful chip on his shoulder, and on a really, really, this is a little bit random. I love in the Alpine setting. He's abandoned his Nehru jackets in favor of kind of the Alpine equivalent. He's still going collarless, but he's got the little smock, which I think is just a great touch.
Oh, it's beautiful. And I like that he cuts his earlobes off. I like that tiny little nod to, we might have met in the last film, but actually we haven't, because I've cut my earlobes off and you're dressed like a professor from the School of Heraldry.
I've got to say, although I think Connery would have been old, fat, and bored, and probably pissed off with everyone, including Diana Rigg in this film, the one thing I do miss is I do think that I would have loved to have seen Sean Connery's Sir Hilary Bray. That's my one thing. The one thing I think we miss out on is Connery camping it up as this this gay genealogist. Basically, I think
Do you
it
reckon
probably
do
being
you reckon he could have?
1969, it would have probably turned out bad, and we probably we wouldn't watch this film anymore. But
Do you know what?
I'd still love to have seen it.
I reckon Connery in 1990 would have pulled that off to a T, but Connery in 69. Oh,
Do you know what, I guess I'm imagining it kind of like Ramirez in Highlander 2. When he comes back and goes to the tailors in Edinburgh. Yeah, that's kind of where my head is, I think. But yeah.
No, but it's always a temptation. It's you wonder how people would have done or different actors would have done in that time. Like we said, George was right for it. He didn't get it spot on, and it was really brave. I mean, these days when we're looking at who's going to replace Daniel Craig, and the word is they're going to go for someone unestablished. They're not going to go for a name actor. They're going to go for someone nobody's ever heard of, and we're all behind it. We think, great, fantastic. Let's follow this actor to stardom or whatever. Back in those days, the audiences were probably expecting the next big thing. Okay, Connery's gone. Who's the biggest movie star in the world? Who's next? Well, you're not going to get anybody next. You're not going to get anybody who's going to play second fiddle to Connery. We're going to have to get this guy who's no acting experience apart from a Turkish Delight advert and modelling clothes in Australia. He's going to be Bond. Really? I don't know. Sorry, we're regressing to a previous point, but I just think perversely it was a very controlling decision, because the producers clearly wanted to be able to control the star in a way that they would never have been able to do with Connery, and clearly couldn't by the end. But also it was brave in that, this is a big franchise. Bond, the character, is bigger than anybody, and whoever we put in there is going to be good. So it was perverse, because I don't think their motives were entirely pure in doing it, but I think it was a massively brave decision.
So, okay, we've already mentioned that Timothy Dalton had been offered the role, so he could have done On Her Majesty's. Now, what about Roger Moore, though? Put Roger Moore in On Her Majesty's Secret Service.
Do you know what? Rogers was always a much better actor than he ever gave himself credit for. I mean, he's famously one of the most humble men in show business, considering the length of his career and the stuff that he'd done and the money that he earned through doing it. The box office that he pulled. He never ever believed. Whether it was a facade of, well, I'm not very good, and he actually really did know how good he was, I don't know. But I always actually think with Roger that he had a certain insecurity about him and a certain inferiority complex that probably stems from the poverty of his youth or whatever, or the humble circumstances of his youth. I think myself he would have pulled it off, because I don't think, under proper direction, I think when Roger left to Roger's own devices, he's going to turn it into a comedy and wink at everyone and raise his eyebrows all day long and make double entendres. But I think if Roger under Peter Hunt's direction, he could have pulled off the romantic lead and the tragedy of Tracy. I think he would have done that very well.
We see it across his 7 films. There are moments in nearly all of them where you get that. So I agree entirely. I think Roger Moore could have done it. It wouldn't have been the Bond we know as Roger Moore's Bond, because it would have been an acting job. It would have been and that's the difference. It would have been a rare acting job for Roger Moore, and I think that's the difference here. But I think he would have done it, because
by 73 he was established as Roger Moore, and he was only ever going to play himself. He was only going to ever do it on his terms. And he was always going to have a nod and a nod and a wink. Man of the Golden Gun is probably the exception to that, because everyone seems to be in a bad mood on that movie. But he all of them. But by the time he got the role, he knew. He had a contract. If more films came from it, great. If they didn't, he knew he'd get other stuff. He was going to play Roger. 69, if they said, come and be the next Bond, follow Connery, who's your mate. So he wouldn't have been necessarily intimidated by it. He would have done it. And with a director like Peter Hunt, I think he would have done a bang-up job. And that is no disrespect to George, again, because I like George in it.
Yeah, but I think Peter Hunt and Roger Moore would have got on.
Yes.
And that makes a massive difference. Yeah.
Yeah. So, and then you would have got Diamonds Are Forever with a proper follow-up to the guy murdering Bond's wife.
Well, let's carry on with this theme then about sort of maybe different different actors in different films. I know that we're going off on a bit of a tangent here, but all of the people that have been cast have invariably been on the radar at some other point. So we've had Dalton many times, Roger actually many times as well. Pierce Brosnan was going to be Bond.
He was fitted. He was costume fitted for the Living Daylights before Remington Steele clawed him back, and so Timothy Dalton was given the job 2 days before principal photography.
Absolutely. And there is actually a lot of publicity stills. Well, I say a lot. I mean, half a dozen, but the point is they exist, of him with Michael Wilson and Cubby Broccoli sort of signing contracts and, twiddling the cufflinks and what have you. And so, it's definitely going to happen. Pictures of him with John Glenn with the Living Daylights clapperboard. It's all going to come to fruition. So, yeah, do you think... Pierce is very different to Timothy. Again, let's put Pierce into the Living Daylights for a moment. What are your thoughts?
And now I'm going to be controversial here because I love Pierce. I've said before, Timothy is my personal favourite Bond. I think if Pierce had got it in '86, the series would have died then, because he would have carried on what Roger was doing. That's clearly his natural intent. He would have been new to the role. John Glenn wanted to go in that way, which is perverse because I think License to Kill is the best thing John Glenn ever directed. I think Pierce would have been very too light-hearted in it, and audiences would have gone, "Yeah, do you know what? Sick of it," and moved on to other things. So there would have been no 1995 reboot. It would have just died a death. That's controversial and backed up by nothing, absolutely nothing but opinion. So. Yeah, I might be very wrong in it.
If he'd got it in '87, who would have starred in the 1995 reboot? Because it was the one thing about casting Brosnan then is that you have the combined, you have the delay and then the shock of it's a new Bond film, a new Bond as well. So I kind of think that relaunch in '95 was vital. But I must admit, I kind of think that if you compare Daniel Craig and Pierce Brosnan, Daniel Craig is in his way. I mean, he could play your plumber and you're not give him a second thought, and he can kind of suddenly be handsome. But he's an actor who thinks about what role am I playing, and he thinks about it from the inside out. What's my job? What's my occupation? How do I see the world? Pierce Brosnan is an actor who thinks, okay, how do I look? He's a very vain, preening Bond because he's kind of insecure because he's like, how am I measuring up? And I just don't think he's not as good an actor. He's possibly one of the weakest actors to have played the part.
Well, actually, in answer to your question, Rob, who would have been Bond? I mean, it's reported quite a lot that the second choice would have been Paul McGann for Goldeneye.
I've heard that. It's funny. I've heard that, and I heard it was, and the studio wanted him. But Eon have always had, and Broccoli was alive then, and Broccoli was obsessed with Bond being 6'2". So Paul McGann is, he's the mini me, So I don't think he'd, it's interesting. Yeah, who know? Then again, who knows now? Because it's 25 years later, and now that's the. It
is.
I
mean,
it's difficult. Yeah.
The list of people who were almost Bond is huge. Isn't it? You can go back to John Gavin. There's a lot of debate about when Roger was first approached. I mean, people say he was approached before Sean, but chronologically, I'm not sure the Saint has started by then. I'm not sure how factually true that probably is. But yeah, I'm not sure the series would have survived if Pierce had taken it in the 80s. And that is no disrespect to him, but I do agree he's not the same strength of actor, and it did need a kick up the arse at that time, the series. I love what Roger did with it, but that kind of almost self-parody, it was almost an Austin Powers movie by View to a Kill. So it was losing its audience. Roger was losing his appeal, and I think to have someone come in and say, well, I'll do exactly what that guy's just done, but I'm a bit younger, a bit sexier, and I'll dress a bit sharper, I'm not sure the audience would have been there. It would have become over camp to the point of just not being effectual,
Yeah.
and I'm not sure the audience would have been there saying, "Let's have another film in the '90s. Where's the next Bond coming from?" I don't think anybody would have cared.
But yeah, I mean, but the thing is as well, though, with Pierce, going back to what you're saying, maybe the fact that Timothy Dalton took it in such a different direction is what made Pierce successful, because
It is.
I don't think people were quite
yeah.
ready for quite as far. The people weren't quite ready for the License to Kill. They would be now. They would love it now.
GoldenEye is going back to formula. Everything in GoldenEye comes from somewhere. It takes stuff from all over the series so far, and it proves on a lot of it, but it's a synthesis of everything that's come before. And Pierce Brosnan as Bond is a synthesis of everything that's come before. So I kind of think, cometh the moment, cometh the man.
Yeah.
I think the kind of the mid-90s. Which was a very postmodern time. Brosnan was the right person for 1995, but I think 87. Bond needed to become dangerous again.
You're absolutely right. The mid '90s, Pierce himself was a more mature actor. He was established in Hollywood to a degree, at least. He had some films under his belt, and he was a recognized name. And he had physically matured. He looked too much of a pretty boy back in the '80s.
He was willowy, wasn't he?
Yeah.
He would have been too Remington Steele in '87.
That's exactly how he would have played it. And
yeah.
I'm going to hate myself for saying this, because I've always said, God, I wish GoldenEye was clearly written for Dalton. The callbacks to don't go off running around on any vendettas and all that. It's all, and the whole theme of revenge. It's all written for Tim Dalton, and I'd dearly love to have seen a third Dalton film, but I think if he had come back, it wouldn't have been the success that it was. And he probably accepted that as well when he thought, well, you want me to sign up for another 4? I'll come back and do one more. And Cubby said, no, you're going to need to do 3 or 4 more or more. No, that's my whole life. I'm not doing it. It was the right decision at the time. It's a shame, because I'd love more Dalton Bond.
And I was wondering why you stopped the James Bond.
Oh, well, because I did it. When I started, it was 8 years ago, and then I did another one 6 years ago. And then the movies were brought to a halt because of a lawsuit between the producers and the studio, which meant there was this huge 6-year gap. And then when that was cleared up, they told me they wanted me to do another, but, I felt I'd done it. Bond is a dominating image, and if I started again now, 6 years later, it'd maybe for the rest of my life.
Yeah, our time is almost up, really, gents, to be honest with you. So, thank you ever so much for talking to us about that. So let's give a little verdict out of 10 then. Let's give a mark out of 10 for On Her Majesty's Secret Service. I'll start. I'll give it an 8. Ed?
Yeah, I'm going to give it a 9. It's one of my favourite Bond films, definitely.
Okay. James?
I'm going to give it a 9 because I think it's near perfection. If we could have just tweaked a couple of things with George's performance and some of the editing, I think it would have been damn near perfection.
Yeah, I think with just a little bit of fine tuning, it could have been, utterly glorious, but it's still piss glorious. So yeah, nine and a half. I think it's so close.
I feel like the Craig Rebel Hallward of this panel. I'll just give it an 8. You say it was all right. Your spins weren't good enough, George, unfortunately. So, well, there we go, George. If you're listening, I think you did pretty well there. To be fair, On Her Majesty's Secret Service, very much lived on this panel, and really, that's all I've got to say. So from me, we've been Bow Ties Sometimes Cool. It's goodbye from me. Goodbye from Ed.
Goodbye.
Goodbye from Rob.
See ya.
And goodbye from James.
Cheerio.